This is the Overton Pod. Hello, Kanthan.
And a happy new year to you too, John.
It's too late to say Happy New Year. We were meant to record the podcast when it was still appropriate to make that wish, but now we're past it. So
Yes.
Happy New Year, I kind of guess, but
Yeah,
you know,
well, I think it's certainly Happy New
it's
Year.
time to. Have you considered Valentine's Day presents yet? I mean, that's where we're at.
I never give Valentine's Day presents.
Yeah, not your thing. We got a bit of a blinker on the camera here, I notice.
So Saint Valentine, you might remember,
Yes.
actually died.
Yes,
And I don't think it's appropriate to be celebrating that type of stuff.
his death.
Yes.
Okay, all right, fair enough. How was your break?
It
How
was
your...
pretty fabulous. So I had a week in the bush where I wrangled a crocodile, as you might be aware. And very good video that Kanthan took while he was wrangling a crocodile out of a chalet, I suppose. yeah, very much so. And it was a great experience.
Yeah.
They're ornery little critters, as the Americans would say. And so it was a week in the bush and then a week down at Langebaan.
Yeah, so that's good.
Yeah, this is the life of the unemployed masses, which is what I am.
Is it the life of the unemployed masses?
I'd like to think so. I mean, if I'm a representative sample, then that's a good thing to do, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, I can't complain. Also had a bit of a rest, which was nice, and back in full swing as the world is about to be. And what are we going to talk about?
Well, we're recording this a couple of days before Trump is meant to be inaugurated. So, clearly we're going to be throwing forward to that. But, of course, we've got to try and get this out there before Trump actually gets inaugurated.
No, it will be out there, hopefully.
So,
between me and people actually sending me the data file, that's, it would help. So that's why we had issues with our December podcast. We apologize for that, but you got it in the end anyway. And you and I had some good banter on that show. Lots of people enjoying you and me heartily disagreeing on things. There has been some stuff, but there hasn't been any major. For example, there's not another leader that's come out of the Middle East. There's no new wars. There seems to be de-escalation of some wars. We can talk about that. What have you picked up as your big happenings in the last 4 weeks?
So the most significant thing for me in the past couple of days has been this pending hostage deal in Israel, which
I think
which is meant to be signed off this coming Saturday, which is tomorrow. So that's clearly one of the biggest things that's happening right now, and it's an interesting time out there, and I suppose we might want to delve into that to some extent. The crucial thing for me though is that it's very clear that this was a deal that was very much driven by Trump, even though he's not yet in office, because he had.
I think almost everyone who's close to the situation and people who are in the room, people who deal with this all the time, these are bipartisan people. I mean, these are even some Democrats have now started to admit that this was all Trump. It had nothing to do. I mean, Biden's tried to take some credit.
Yeah.
Not Biden, the people that currently control
but essentially
that office.
Steve Witkoff flew in to gate crash the meeting in Doha, even though he's technically got no official standing in terms of it, and basically whipped them into line. And what was interesting was the discussion that he subsequently had with Bibi.
Yeah.
Where he told Bibi, right, now we've got to talk and we've got to get this thing wrapped up. And Bibi says, well, it's Shabbat and I'm not going to be working on Shabbat. And apparently Witkoff absolutely blew his top. He says, no, you are going to put the interests of your country first, and I'm flying in to meet you. And they sat down on Saturday and hammered out the details. The interesting thing for me, of course, is how this plays out now in terms of Netanyahu's own coalition, because a couple of his partners have threatened to walk out because.
Well, let's dig down deep into it then, because firstly, what do you make of the criticism that Witkoff is actually tied into the Qataris, and for $600 million they funded a property deal that he's involved in. He's a hotelier, basically, entrepreneur, that kind of guy. Similar to Trump, just not kind of as bold a character, I suppose, and not as well known, obviously. But he's definitely done business with the Qataris, put it that way. And there's a lot of criticism that this was the deal was done, and it's not a great deal. Just to outline what's meant to happen. So the deal is in phases, which I don't think has been well reported. So we're meant to go into phase one. It's not clear how many phases there are, but it seems to be 3 or 4 phases. The phase one deal is ceasefire, that there's a certain amount of return allowed to northern Gaza. Civilians are allowed to return to that area via a certain corridor, essentially along the coast. And that in return for the ceasefire and kind of Israel staying in the area, so they will stay in what's called the Philadelphia corridor, which is the area between Gaza and Egypt. And they will stay in other areas in Gaza, but there will be no active fighting from either side. So in theory, Israel won't fire a bullet and Hamas won't either, or bomb anything or whatever it is. In return for that, 33 hostages get returned. It's not clear how many of those will be alive. So some might just be returned as corpses or remains. Word is 23 alive, 10 dead. To give you also some context, it's 33 of 98 total hostages remaining, and so a third, basically. And importantly, perhaps, is that of the Americans who are still hostage, none of them are included in the 33. So there's been a lot of criticism that I've seen, both for Bibi. Some people saying if that's the deal, it's the end of his political career. Israelis won't accept that. They took a lot of sacrifice. Their husbands went and fought in war. Their kids died. They lost soldiers, etc., etc. And of course, they haven't kind of resolved the problem that caused October 7th, which was Hamas is in charge of the Gaza Strip. So there's some criticism in that way. There's also some criticism of Trump that in his haste to get a deal, he didn't get a particularly good one. What's your take?
I think by and large, everything you say, I agree with completely.
Okay. I'm reflecting other people.
Yeah, no, for sure. No,
I'll tell you my take in a second.
Yeah, no, I'm talking in terms of all of the info that you put on the table so far. That's very much my take in terms of it as well. So a couple of things. So firstly, there's no such thing as a good deal with terrorists. Okay, so
which is why you don't negotiate with him.
Yeah, so we established that as a baseline, but I also think the other point that that needs to be made is that there is a desperate haste on the part of Hamas to get something in place before the 20th because of Trump's very firm commitment that in the event of hostages not being released by the 20th, that they will be held to pay. And I think more to the point, I actually believe that is the case. That I can very easily envisage a situation where if there is any element of Hamas trying to in any way renege on any parts of this deal, would we see a scenario where the U.S. is actually committing forces to go in on the side of Israel? I think that I would put money on that. I would say that.
That would be very unpopular. Any American forces on the ground. I think Trump. Part of Trump's win.
No. You see, it depends on unpopular with whom. It would certainly be unpopular in terms of a global level, but certainly in terms of Trump's commitment. Where remember that this is a man with a better than 70% approval rating currently, and he has gone in with very specific promises that he's made to people. The one is that he's going to sort out the war in Ukraine, and that's going to take a bit longer. But he's also been very clear that the hostage situation is intolerable and the hostages have to be released. And if he commits American troops to going in on the side of Israel. Is that likely to be unpopular with his home base? I think the answer to that is no. I think,
I would say the opposite. I would say that his base is very much against U.S. military being used overseas on any permanent basis. And so, a lot of it's the forever war base, the people that are against that.
Remember in this case, the commitment from Trump's side is the fact that they are American citizens that are being held by Hamas. And that is the distinguishing factor. And Trump is very good at being able to actually mobilize around those key points. And if he goes and saying, we have American lives on the ground there, and I'm going in there because this is an intolerable situation. And he's also going to say stuff like, make no mistake, wherever you happen to be around the world, if you go after American citizens, we're going to come after you. And I think that that's a line that he can actually sell to his voting base.
All right. I mean, that's interesting because then that implies that the deal has multiple aspects to it which aren't on the face of it. Okay,
that would be my assessment.
I agree with.
Yes.
I just didn't think of that aspect which you've just detailed, which is Trump is leaving the Americans as hostages so that he's got leverage to basically do whatever he likes.
That's my take on it. Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough. We'll have to see how that comes. Look, Trump will do whatever he does. I still don't believe that'll be particularly popular with his base. I also think that his right-wing base is very much split into two. One which is pro-Israel, and one which is actually anti-Israel, and then a corner of that which is just straight out anti-Semitic.
But at the same time, take the view that all of the people that he's bringing on board with his core team are very much pro-Israel.
Yes, that's true.
There's not a single person in his cabinet picks that in any way vacillates on the subject of Israel. So I think that that's a very core point. The other point that I need to make is that I'm very clear that Trump is firmly committed to the security of Israel. I'm also very clear that he does not have the same commitment to the security of Netanyahu. And, those are two...
Can I tell you why that is, though?
Well, go for it. Tell me.
Well, I mean, when 2020 happened,
yes,
Netanyahu ran screaming from Trump. So Netanyahu embraced Trump very heavily from the time it was clear he was going to be the president. So when he beat Hillary Clinton. And then Trump was the best American president for Israel in history. There's no doubt about that. The moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, the support that he received from Trump, bearing in mind that Obama was inviting Netanyahu to come to the White House and then not letting him come through the front door, literally making him use a staff entrance. Like these were the types of things that were going on. Obama would meet with Netanyahu. They would have certain discussions about things, and then Obama would say completely different things to the media. And to the people who were doing stuff in the Middle East. So there were double messages. Obama was only a friend to Israel in that the United States is a friend to Israel, but he himself was no friend to Israel. So Netanyahu embraces Trump. Trump is then the best president that Israel's ever had in terms of an American. And the minute Biden allegedly wins the 2020 election, Netanyahu immediately moves and pivots away from Trump and embraces Biden. And in fact, around January 6th is somewhat critical of Trump. And so I think that relationship soured. I don't know what your take is.
Yeah, I agree completely with that. And at the same time, it was a disastrous move on Netanyahu's part because he was trying to make friends with Biden, and that was never going to happen because it was very clear that Biden had no interest whatsoever.
And the people in the administration. I mean, you've just described the people in Trump's administration as being pro-Israel. That's very clear they are.
Yes.
You can go look at their records, their public statements. You can say the opposite of Biden's team. There were very many people in his administration
very clear that Blinken, for example, systematically sabotaged any attempt to actually get a decent deal procured on the part of Israel, but more specifically, a prompt return of the hostages. You know, the idea that the Biden administration could allow this scenario where, you know, how long has it been now? It's in terms of days since.
Yeah, it's 1,000 and no, it's not 1,000.
No,
sorry,
no,
it's 15, 16 months. So
Yes.
what are we talking?
Yeah.
Like 450, 500 days, something like
it's
that.
almost 500 days. I would say that where there's been no movement whatsoever. Now, it's also very clear to me that Trump wants to wrap up the entire Middle East scenario as quickly as possible. So if allowing Bibi to fall is going to be pivotal to his securing diplomatic relations between the Saudis and Israel, which I think is very much on the cards. I think he'll have no hesitation in doing that.
Right. So on the deal, I think my take is there's multiple phases to the deal. Hamas never honors a deal. They just don't. That's the history of it. Maybe they'll honor this one, but they haven't traditionally been very good at honoring deals. So, you know, a comment will be passed such as there was peace on October the 6th, 2023. And then Hamas decided to do October the 7th. Except there wasn't really peace. There was just Israel very seldomly retaliating against, rockets indiscriminately launched from the Gaza Strip. So the reality is, I don't think Hamas will be able to follow through. I wonder if there's not a little bit of 3D chess being played in the sense that they know that Hamas isn't able to stick to their word. And so someone's going to do something stupid. And then they get 33 hostages back. Yes, there's still 60 odd remaining, but they've got 33, and now they get to go back to war with them. And you then have the leverage to the Qataris, who negotiate basically on their behalf, going, listen, Israel wasn't the one who fired the shots, folks. Hamas were. Israel's now pounding them. We're supporting them fully, and you better get on board. So there might be a little bit of play happening there, because this is meant to, as I say, happen in multiple phases, which ultimately is meant to end with Israel, again, leaving the Gaza Strip, as they did in 2006. So...
except in this particular case, as part of the deal, Israel will not be leaving the Gaza Strip.
Yeah, not complete.
Yes, yeah. So that's a critical difference.
For any point that matters, they'll be out, essentially.
But there's another piece of the puzzle that we need to toss in as well, and that's the kind of slow unfolding of what's going down in Syria. And you've now got this scenario where Erdogan, and my disdain for Erdogan, I think that he's the single most treacherous leader in the world.
Okay, so you feel about Erdogan like some people feel about Putin.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Except I've never known Putin to break his word.
Uh-huh.
Okay, Erdogan breaks his word consistently, and one of the things that is a point of great concern right now is that in his quest to secure his control over the current regime in Syria, it's very clear that Erdogan is not ruling out the possibility of a continued pathway for Hezbollah to continue receiving supplies from Iran, which is, of course, then setting himself up for immediate confrontation with Trump, very specifically on that point, because as a fellow NATO member, he should definitely not be stepping out of line at that level. But also, it's immediately putting himself at loggerheads with Israel as well. And it's an additional complication in the... So it's not just about what's going down in Gaza right now. There's so if you're talking about what's the chess game that Trump actually has to manage, I think that if I'm just predicting based on stuff that he said, I think closing a deal between the Saudis and Israel is kind of at the top of the list, because one of the reasons why he has to do that as quickly as possible is that in order for him to go after the Houthis, he needs to have the Saudis very firmly on side before he ends up taking action at that level. And, let's be very clear about that as well, that he's committed to ensuring the safe passage of all ships through the Suez Canal. So I guess we need to look at this deal in the context of his needing to pull all of these pieces together, and so it's not only about
single thing.
Yeah, it's not about the single thing.
Well, what's interesting about it is that if a Saudi-Israel deal were to happen, that would actually add a lot of buoyancy to Netanyahu. And so a failure, what would be perceived by the Israeli public as a failure on Gaza, may also then be overridden to some extent, at least enough to keep him in power, by the fact that he gets this deal with Saudi. That's one thing to consider. The other thing to consider is, look, on the face of it, I think it's a terrible deal. Right, you're getting a third of the hostages. You're saying Hamas gets to basically regroup. Oh, forgot to mention, they get more than 1,000 of their people, most of whom have been tried and convicted of crimes like murder. They get those people released straight back into Gaza. Those people will essentially just replenish their military ranks. So you're backing off of what your stated main military aim was: rescue the hostages. You failed 2/3 on that, and you also wanted to destroy Hamas, and you haven't done that. Okay, so that looks like a big failure. But I think we need to see what happens and what plays out, because this is a country that destroyed Hezbollah using pages, and as we discussed on the last podcast, has captured a portion of Syria that enables essentially them to have military air dominance over the region up to Iran. So, I wouldn't put it past the Israelis to be thinking some sort of long game. Maybe they're not, but I highly doubt it. This is a country and a military that is on sort of high adrenaline alert following the 7th of October. It's still very real, very raw. And so I think everything that's being done is somewhat calculated. Now, whether they'll always get their way, obviously Trump has his own issues. The Saudis, Iran, Turkey, there's a lot that plays into it. What's going on in Syria, who knows how that coalesces in the end? Because you've got one of America's most wanted men, now basically the head of Syria. We'll see whether he ends up running a successful country, whether that becomes a proper government, or whether it breaks up like Libya has broken up and is basically run by warlords in various regions. So all of these things are very interesting, but I wouldn't take the Israeli Hamas deal on face value. That's all I can say at this point.
I agree completely with that.
Yeah.
I think that it's a piece of a larger puzzle, a significant piece. But I also think that from the point of view of Trump needing to start from day one, from a negotiating from a position of strength, does it give him that? I think the answer to that is yes.
Oh, absolutely. Well, it's buoyed him in the media. You can see it immediately. Even the networks that hate him, MSNBC, CNN, have had to kind of openly admit that this is a Trump deal and that Trump has done this. And
even Washington Post has been,
after the New York Times and the Washington Post last year, October, I think, published articles saying, Trump says he's gonna end this war before he's gonna get a ceasefire before he comes into power, and they all said, experts have said, we love that saying, experts have said that'll never happen, and well, it just did.
These are the same experts who said that Jared Kushner didn't have a clue in terms of what he was doing, and he brokered the Abraham Accords.
Jared Kushner, who is what a mind, really, brilliant guy. Not as far as I know involved in the second administration. A bit of a pity, in my opinion. But obviously, on other things, does lean quite left. Does come from a family of Democrats. So if you're not a fan of those policies, I guess you'll celebrate that.
But then so was Trump.
Absolutely.
Yeah, he was a Democrat originally.
Right.
And in fact, a significant chunk of the people that he surrounded himself with were former Democrats. I mean, Musk being an example, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr. So there's quite a few.
All right, let's throw forward then, because we're into that discussion on Trump. So essentially, we're having confirmation hearings at the moment, and that means that all of Trump's bigger nominations, his cabinet, head of FBI, CIA, certain other major positions within the government, Tulsi Gabbard being a big example, DNI, which is the Director of National Intelligence, who collates, I think it's 17 agencies, if I remember correctly, who all collect intelligence, and was set up post 9/11 because they realized that some of their intelligence agencies had picked up intelligence that they may have been able to stop parts of 9/11 or all of it. Obviously, I'm a buyer of the official narrative, Kanthan, but you might not be. I don't know. Are you a truther?
Look, I have been a buyer of the official narrative, but is it also clear to me that there's stuff that we don't know? I think the answer to that is yes.
I'm on the same page.
Yeah.
Just to be clear.
So I'm waiting for stuff to come out, but I'm still very much on the official narrative in the meanwhile.
Yeah, sure. So, but whatever you think about that, it was set up in response to that. Quite a interesting and powerful position, and so these confirmation hearings are happening. Senate sits and basically grills each candidate for a couple of hours.
So I've been taking in a couple of those.
Yeah, as have I.
Right, and so just for starters, I sat through a fair whack of Pete Hegseth's hearing. So he, of course, is contender for Secretary of Defense, and I was very impressed with the way in which the guy handled himself throughout the entire thing. So just some background out here. This is a guy where the Democrats have gone back to their old playbook, which is to try and throw allegations of impropriety, particularly in terms of sexual relationships against the candidate. And this has been the playbook that goes back to the time that Clarence Thomas was nominee for the Supreme Court.
Correct.
And there was an entire manufactured outrage at the time, and it's been the playbook ever since. We saw this in the case of Brett Kavanaugh in terms of his Supreme Court confirmation hearings.
The sexual stuff seems to be the bridge too far, or traditionally has been the bridge too far. It's a reason why they dropped that, grab them by the P tape
Yes.
Just before the 2016 election. They thought that would sink Trump. They thought that would be enough, because the one thing Americans don't do well. And this isn't any kind of theory. This is obvious. You can go to their media. Hollywood has long been known, in comparison to European film, for being more than happy with lots of violence. You can see as much blood and killing on television as you like, but sex has always been the thing you can't see, right?
Yes.
To American audiences. European films are a little bit opposite to that, although they're not exactly against gore. But European films have always considered softcore porn as part of a normal filmmaking process.
Very much so. I used to say, for years, the interesting thing about American movies, seeing a woman's breast getting hacked off with a chainsaw, that's cool.
Yeah.
But seeing a woman's breast in lovemaking, in a tender, romantic, committed scenario, no, that's an absolute no. It is that kind of bizarre discrepancy that grips that society.
Always, so the psyche of the Americans have always not dealt with sexual scandal very well. So that has always been the thing to sink people. But I think Brett Kavanaugh kind of was the straw that broke the camel's back on the Americans just swallowing things whole in this regard. And it was very clear that Brett Kavanaugh didn't do anything wrong, that, much like a lot of these allegations that have come up, the woman couldn't remember the date, the place, the time. There was a whole bunch of problems, and And it just was out of character with the man.
Yes.
Who had never behaved like that in any other situation. Very weird that a college frat boy goes and behaves like that, then becomes a very powerful judge and never lays a hand on a woman in a sort of indiscrepant way, I suppose.
Yeah. So Hegseth was basically accused of covering up an abusive scenario in a relationship.
No.
And he was accused of it.
No, he was accused of rape.
Yes.
Well, okay, so I've went quite deep into this because I wanted to know all the facts so that I could say, well, I do or don't think this guy should be confirmed. It's a big position, Secretary of Defense. I mean, he does sort of come from left field, so to speak, in the sense that every other person appointed to this position in the last century, pretty much, has been someone hailing from very high in the military, usually. And if they don't hail high in the military, they were in the military, and then they've been in the military-industrial complex. And, there's this constant enrollment in that kind of sphere.
Yes. There's
Hegseth,
kind of a revolving door there.
Yeah, Hegseth isn't that guy. So yes. Hegseth is the guy that goes and is actually a grunt. Does special forces training, goes and is in Afghanistan, is in Iraq, if I'm not mistaken, but definitely was in Afghanistan. Multiple tours, leader of a unit, etc.
Does 5 sets of 47 push-ups in the morning before going to work.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think he was pulling the piss on the 47, but for obvious reasons. But the thing is but he rises up the ranks, but not very high. He never becomes an admiral or a general. Okay, and that's generally what you'd be thinking if you're going to employ a military guy.
But it's because he never was a career military person.
That's right.
So it's very clear that he was there to serve.
Right. So he serves in the military for a good period of time and then goes back to his studies. So he leaves his studies quite admirably. He leaves his studies at an Ivy League, Yale at the time, and he leaves his studies to go and be in the military. Then comes back.
Wasn't at Yale? He was at Princeton.
I thought he was Yale and Harvard, if I'm not mistaken.
He was at Princeton.
We can get fact checked by our audience. Cool, but I'll take your fact check. No problem. Of course, you would know if he was at Princeton, so of course. Anyway, the point is he goes back, does studies. He's got degrees from 2 Ivy League universities, so if you value that kind of credentialism, he's got that, plus the military background. And then he goes into entertainment, into television. He ends up as a Fox News presenter, quite a popular, successful guy on one of their biggest shows. And now gets appointed. So you do want to kind of know, okay, I understand this guy's fought on the ground, which I think is a good thing. He's got a lot of support from the base of just ignore Kanthan's phone. He's got a lot. We're not on silent apparently. So
I had put it on do not disturb, but obviously he's one of those
contacts
people
that comes through.
No. You have a person who then calls twice, and then it bypasses the do not disturb.
Yes. Okay. So I looked at the allegation. The allegation is essentially Pete went to talk at a conference. The conference was of Republican women. Some sort of conference like that. It's night time. Everyone's having a drink at the bar by the pool type of thing at the hotel. Pete's Pete's known for liking his women. He's on to his 3rd wife today. At that point, he was divorcing his 2nd wife. But not divorced yet, but they were in the process. And he's well known as a guy who likes to, get around with the ladies. So... but there's never been any impropriety claimed. It's just that, that's something he does. So, fine. He's having drinks. Everyone's having a drink. He's particularly interested in one woman, and she's not particularly interested in him. So the woman who organized the conference gets called over to kind of pull Pete away, who's a couple of drinks in. Video cameras show that he was not only a couple of drinks in, but when he walked with this woman to his room, he was like not walking 100% straight. He was stumbling a little bit. Fine. They got up to the room. There's cameras all the way there, basically, down the hallway and everything. There's no sign of any aggression or anything. She follows him into his room. Not he pushes her into the room. She follows him into the room. They then have sex. And her kids and her husband are in the same hotel down the corridor, basically, or 1 or 2 floors down. It's not really stated, but they're in the same hotel block. And so she goes missing for 3-4 hours and then goes back to her room. And her husband has now not seen her. He expected her back at like 12-ish or whatever it was. And she's only arrived back at like 3 in the morning. And he's like, where were you? And she lies and says, no, I fell asleep in a friend's room. And subsequently, then what happens is, obviously, we don't really know what goes on behind the scenes between the wife and the husband. She allegedly sleeps with the husband on that Monday morning. So this is the Saturday or Sunday morning. She then sleeps with the husband the Monday morning when they're back at home. And then later that week, she tells the husband, no, I was raped. Okay. Goes to because he starts asking questions. She then goes to the, casualty doctors' rooms, etc. And it's too late to do a rape kit because it's too many days past the event. Plus, she slept with her husband in the meantime. So nobody does that. And
clearly she does.
Hey?
Well, clearly she does.
Clearly she does. No, I'm saying nobody does the kit and whatever.
Yes, no,
sure.
Yeah.
I'm not judging how people might behave if they were genuinely raped. Then what happens is she doesn't. She then goes to the cops and she claims rape. This happens with the hospital visit and everything. Fine. The cops then take interviews from everyone involved. And they go check out some of the evidence, and they decide that there is no evidence.
And they look at the camera footage, obviously.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
They look at the camera footage, they take statements, etc. And based on what they've collected, they do not believe there is any evidence to prosecute. So that's it. That's the end of that. However, this woman is not happy, and so she basically says to Pete, you better pay me to keep quiet. At the time, Me Too is happening. And Pete looks at it and goes, if someone comes out now and says, I raped them, there's not going to be any logical discussion of whether that actually occurred.
Yes.
There's just going to be a mob, and I'm going to lose my job, and I quite like my job and my career, and I don't want that to happen. So from his claim is that
he signs a non-disclosure.
Signs a non-disclosure with her and pays her a significant amount of money, which apparently he was still paying her up until now. And then it was leaked, inverted commas, by a friend of hers to the Trump team, supposedly. Now, Megyn Kelly's done a very deep dive on this. This is where I get most of that data, although some other places too. So there's a whole podcast she did on this alone. If you don't buy his story or her story or whatever, you want to go more into it, I'd suggest you go listen to that because she went through all of it. She's got the police reports. She's got all of the data. Very, very well done. So the claim was rape. I think it's very clear this is a false rape claim. And I'm quite happy with how he performed, and I think he's going to be confirmed. I don't know what your take is.
Well, I think more to the point, as things currently stand, I don't think that there's going to be a possibility that any of Trump's nominees do not get confirmed.
Yeah.
And the reason for that is that any senator, and so there's a Republican majority going into the Trump term. And any Republican senator who fails to confirm any of Trump's nominees is basically going to be targeted by Trump for the midterm elections.
Yep.
And is going to end up losing their seat.
Yeah.
It's very clear to me around that. So everything right now is very much on Trump's side in terms of getting his team confirmed.
He can lose 3 Republicans, just to be clear. So he can lose 3 because they have that much of a majority.
Yes.
So they have a 53-47 majority, and he obviously can lose 3, which gives him 50.
Yes.
And then that would be a tie. And then
in which case the vice president
is the tiebreaker.
Yes.
Right. So
but I'm saying that those 3, if they happen to go against him, are very likely to then be targeted by him And
So well, those three. So one of them is the former Senate Majority Leader. It looks like a tortoise. McConnell, yes. So McConnell is not running again. So he's got nothing to fear. So he's going to be, and he hates Trump. So he's going to be a thorn in Trump's side for the rest of his term. And there's two others, Susan Collins and Murkowski. I think it's Lisa Murkowski, if I'm not mistaken. So they are basically purple state Republicans who, if given a choice, always side on the left side of an issue than the right. Okay, so those are the three he's going to lose. But yes, like Joni Ernst. So Joni Ernst threatened to not to vote against Pete Hegseth, allegedly because she had some of her own self-interest in becoming the SecDef, and she was basically, it became very clear that she would be primary, and she has withdrawn from that. But what I want to say is that we've had Pete, we've had Pam Bondi, who is the candidate for Attorney General,
who was also quite impressive.
Who was, exactly. This is what I wanted to say. We've had her. We've had Besant, I think it's Scott Besant, who is for Treasury. All of these candidates have actually held their own very, very well. And the problem is that the senators that might want to vote against his people, they need a good reason. And they need a good reason that comes out in the confirmation hearings. It's not just, I don't like him, or, Pete Hegseth, what you'll hear is he doesn't have enough experience, for example. Managing large organizations in the Pentagon is $1 trillion enterprise, and so, you can't do that type of thing. Other than that, there's been nothing in the hearings which give them cause. So the Democrats are going to vote along partisan lines, which is hilarious, and so hypocritical in the sense that many Republicans actually voted for Biden's appointees. Yes. If they were reasonable in the hearings, they voted. Watch, though, for John Fetterman. I think there are several Trump appointees that he will vote for.
Yes.
I think there are a couple that he won't, but I think there are several that he will vote for.
Well, Fetterman's already been causing ructions because he actually went to Mar-a-Lago to meet Trump. And people got uptight with him, and he said, "Look, I'm not a Republican senator. I'm a senator for all of the people in my state.
Yeah,
and it's my duty to be working with the president to ensure I'm getting the best possible deal
for Pennsylvania."
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And I think that's going to win him lots of brownie points. And but more importantly, it's the kind of pragmatic stuff that everyone should be doing right now by recognizing. Stuff has changed.
Well, what is amazing to me is exactly stuff has changed. It's very clear that Trump derangement syndrome is over. You're not in the cool group anymore if you have Trump derangement syndrome. If you're on the Adam Schiff side still, who's now been promoted to senator because anything you run for in California as a Democrat, you will win. So he's now gone from being annoying in the Congress or the House to being annoying in the Senate. But it's just very clear that nobody's in it for this. Trump derangement syndrome has died. And if you're still in that space of, he's Hitler, he's the worst thing that's ever happened, nobody else is on that page anymore. Like, it's been proven that he's not because he already had a term. Everyone got to see the other side of what you get when you don't have Trump. And you have the inverted commas opposite, the adults in the room. That was Joe Biden, a disastrous presidency, possibly one of the worst in American history. Not possibly, definitely one of the worst in American history, arguably one of the worst ever. That time will decide that. And it's just very clear that Fetterman is taking the right position as a Democrat because, and the other people doing this as well. There's a Democrat called Ro Khanna, who's from California, who's in the House. And he also is a very reasonable guy. He's a Democrat, and he'll push Democrat policies. Ask him about abortion, he's pro, obviously. But he's not unreasonable in how he assesses the situation. If Trump does something he likes, he goes, yeah, I agree with that. And if he does something he doesn't, he goes, I disagree with that. But at least it looks consistent, right? He's an honest broker. And if the Democrats want to come back, that's what they've got to have. I would be very surprised to not see John Fetterman on a presidential 2028 stage.
I think that's very much likely to be the case.
Not the candidate, but certainly that he will run for a candidacy. I'd be very surprised. And I think he'd be quite popular. Comes from a swing state.
But at the same time, take the view that we still haven't seen the reform happening in the Democrat National Convention that is meant to be happening, which means that any candidate that gets put up in 4 years' time is, again, going to be one of those candidates that is picked, approved by the Democrat insiders, which I think if you look in terms of the opening up of public access to information that's taken place over the past 2 years in particular, that's a narrative that's not going to fly with the voters in 4 years' time, because they're not going to accept an insider that is foisted upon them where there isn't, transparent primaries. And
the Democrat Party has to have its moment, right? In terms of what the Republican Party has been through. Both of these parties were corporate entities.
Yes,
and Trump broke the corporate entity that was the Republican Party, and that's why the Renos, the corporate control, where it didn't matter whether you voted Democrat or Republican, you were getting the same agricultural policy, because Monsanto bought both. It didn't matter. It didn't matter whether you voted Republican or Democrat. You were getting the same foreign policy positions, because both parties had the same ideas on big things. I think the Democrats, they haven't had it yet, and if they try to push through another consensus candidate in 2028, I think things are going to break, like, really badly. You never know where that goes. You could end up in a Democrat party. You could end up with AOC as a candidate. But it'll be interesting, nevertheless. It'll be interesting. What do you think? So we haven't seen Robert F. Kennedy yet.
No.
How do you think that's going to play?
I think that's going to be, if we thought that the Democrats were vicious with Hegseth and with Bondi thus far, Treasury Secretary, I think is not something that people want to fight about, because it's not one of the controversial things from the perspective of the U.S. But how are the Democrats going to react to one of their own who's basically crossed the line? I think that's going to be quite vicious.
Well, yes, but remember, there's a lot of Democrats, roughly 20% of people who consider themselves Democrats, support RFK.
Correct.
So now the question you have...
But does that reflect in the makeup of the people who sit in the Senate, which is a different question?
Well, I would think that if he's particularly popular in a specific state, places... perhaps Pennsylvania, perhaps places like Michigan, sort of places that have previously been both Democrat and Republican, where you will find more of a typical American, so to speak. So, a New Yorker's a New Yorker in terms of a person you find in Manhattan is going to believe everything they see on the news.
So you're saying Democratic senators would be afraid of alienating their base?
I think that might be.
That's an interesting thought, and which I had not considered.
Put it this way: I'll be surprised if. So I actually think RFK may lose some Republicans. I think that'd be very stupid to go against Trump, because they'll get primaried, as you mentioned. But I can tell you now that McConnell, for example, in fact, Mike Pence, who's not a senator, obviously, but Mike Pence has launched a whole campaign to try and prevent RFK from ascending, because Mike Pence, he claims the reason is because RFK is pro-abortion, and obviously Pence is anti. But that's a stupid reason, because RFK will have no power over that.
Correct. And more to the point, the abortion question from Trump's perspective
is resolved.
Is off the table.
100%.
Yes, and he's not going to entertain any discussions around that.
It's done.
Yeah.
So, but obviously Pence is doing it because he doesn't like RFK and wants to sabotage Trump to an extent. Because I think, in my opinion, the areas where Trump will have the greatest success will be foreign policy, based on the fact that that's where he had the greatest success last time. And then the next areas where he'll have the greatest success will be the economy health and human services, so health in general, because of RFK, and then the Department of Government Efficiency, so shrinking government and making it more efficient because of Musk and
I think
Vivek.
education is going to be huge in terms of Trump moving in.
Yeah, I hope you're right.
You see, the reason why I think that education is going to be huge is if you look in terms of the sheer amount of wastage right now that happens in terms of the federal education spend.
Yeah.
And the very simple act of Trump dissolving that upper layer of bureaucrats and transferring those funds directly to the states is immediately going to be transformative at just so many levels, because it means that the states then get to spend money on actual teaching as opposed to this administrative overlay that doesn't really add any value whatsoever to what the kids are actually learning in school.
We'll see, because the problem is that the person he's sort of put there, which is McMahon, Linda McMahon, Vince McMahon's wife. I'm not sure. There was a lot of hope. Betsy DeVos was there last time, and there was a lot of hope that she would kind of fix education and really take on the unions and get on top of it. Get on top of it, because there's no excuse for America having the education system that they do.
Except at the time, he didn't understand the rules of engagement. And more crucially, he didn't understand everything that Musk and Vivek between them understand around how to get Doge actually working. And so the ability of Doge to then be working on those various departments to slash the bureaucracy, which is basically the question that we're talking about here. It's kind of almost like each of these departmental heads, be it defense, be it education, national intelligence, is going to have Doge on their side, basically crawling through the entire structure of those departments and immediately pointing out what can be stripped out in order to make it more efficient. So I think it's going to be very different to the scenario that Trump faced in his first term. He now understands how to actually get rid of all of the rot that's within this bureaucratic overlay that they have.
Well, I do hope so. I do hope that that's true. As I was saying, I think RFK probably gets through. I think he may have a one or two Republican senators unexpected vote against him, although I think that'd be very silly to do that. And I also think that you will see a couple of Democrats go towards him. I think they'll. It's a smart move. It's a smart move, and it's interesting. We're seeing some pivots happen. So there's a whole bunch of very pro-COVID people, for example, who pushed every bad idea during that period. There's a whole bunch of very pro people that are suddenly backing very far off of all of those ideas. They're running away from them screaming. And I wonder why that is. And to me, that implies that there's something coming. They don't want to be part of whatever it is that's coming. And so they're trying to run away from their ideas as fast as they can, because there's going to be some sort of follow-up on that. So that's interesting. The other thing that happened a day or two ago was that the FDA has finally banned red dye number 3. From American foods. Now, red dye number 3 is banned in South Africa, as far as I know. It's banned across the entire European Union. I think it's also banned in Canada and Australia. So it's banned pretty much in every first world country and every country that thinks it's first world, like South Africa. And the reason for that is that 30 years ago, it was being used in food and makeup, cosmetics, and it was shown that it could cause cancer in mice. And so they took it out of cosmetics, but left it in the food. And RFK is one of the things he's gone on about, is the additives to food, specifically things like colorants, which we know are dangerous. And why a country like America, if you compare, there was that funny headline last year, I think we might have discussed it, about the Fruit Loops. RFK had said that Fruit Loops in America and Canada had different ingredients.
Yes.
Same product, different ingredients. And why is that? And the reason is because America uses non-natural things like red dye number 3, and Canada doesn't because they can't.
Well, we've got the same situation in South Africa right now, where products that are sold on our shelves are entirely different from their counterparts overseas. So, two very specific examples. So Rice Krispies, as a specific example. Rice Krispies in South Africa is no longer rice.
What is it?
It's a multi-grain cereal. So they've been, because the rice is more expensive than wheat and maize, they've been scaling back on the rice. And but you buy Rice Krispies in the UK, it is made of rice. As an example.
Wow, I didn't know that at all.
Then you take soft drinks. You buy a Fanta in Italy.
Yes.
It's 20% orange juice.
Yes.
Okay, you buy a Fanta in South Africa. There's no
orange juice.
None whatsoever. and again, this is failure on the part of our government to actually enforce, sort of very minimal standards in terms of our food safety.
Yes.
There's just no attention being paid to this stuff at all because, frankly, they don't understand this stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's way above their pay grade.
Yes, and also there's a lot of vested interests that kind of prevent that from happening. And obviously the money's in the food industry, right?
Let's not forget the disastrous impact of the sugar tax, because basically it's...
the sugar tax.
Yes.
Jeez, what a nightmare. Just to remember that when the sugar tax happened and all of you kind of heard it on the news and you thought, no big deal, whatever, I'll pay a few extra cents. Just to remind you that firstly, they've destroyed a whole bunch of the foods that I used to enjoy. But the other thing that has happened, that hasn't happened, is they said at the time, the experts said, we have to do the sugar tax because 300,000 to 400,000 people will go from being obese to not being obese. Has that happened, Kanthan?
Absolutely not.
Nope, the opposite has happened.
Yeah, but it's kind of like if you pay more money for a carbon tax, then temperatures are going to come down.
Absolutely. This is why I constantly want to pay the government more money so I can change the weather. That's just my personal take. I don't know about you. I'm sure you want to give up all your money as well so you can change the weather.
Well, I think California has shown how effectively this works.
Wow. Okay. So okay, cool. So are we kind of done on Trump? We both think he's going to get his people.
I think he's going to get his people. Obviously, the most crucial thing is going to be the number of executive orders that he issues on day one, at the point that he steps into office, and my take on this that he's probably got hundreds of these things that have been lined up that are going to be coming rapid fire, and by the time you and I sit down next time, we probably will still not have gone through all of the stuff that he's done, that he's put on the table.
Oh, yeah, and I'd expect no less than 25 executive orders on day one.
At very least, yeah.
Yeah. Bearing in mind, I'm not a big fan of the executive order thing, but that's how it's now done.
Yes.
Obama accelerated this heavily. Trump then copied that in his term to a slightly lesser extent, but he still copied it. And then Biden has been uncontrolled. Yes. Uncontrolled with
except
executive
I
orders.
think the difference with Trump is that whatever things he puts in as executive orders, he's immediately going to ask Congress to codify into law.
Well, that's what's got to happen. Yes. That's why I don't like executive orders, because the next guy can just take them away. And if they're good and they make sense, then you should just leave them in place as law, right?
Correct, yes.
But Congress obviously drags its feet and obviously tries to always do this omnibus bill thing where instead of just saying we're going to make a law that all cars sold must be black, they make a law that all cars sold must be black, but they also add into that law a whole bunch of stuff about funding Ukraine or paying for gypsies to learn violin in the Netherlands.
So one of the things that I
that.
think Trump is likely to be hard asked about is to say that he's going to veto omnibus bills.
Yeah.
Because it certainly is in his interest to do so. He's going to say, send me one thing at a time and I'll sign off on it.
They should do that. That's what a legislature should do. They should legislate individual laws at a single time, and the laws should be as simple as they can. I mean, Elon Musk has made this point. If you want to make a law, the law should be a single sentence or at most a paragraph, and even a fifth grader should be able to understand what the law is trying to achieve. If you have pages and pages of complexity, the one good example on this actually in the States is their tax law. I think their tax law originally, when it came into being, I'll be very surprised if Trump doesn't do big things to income tax, but their tax law when it came into being was 10 pages, something silly. It was small. You could read it quickly and understand what was required. Tax law is now hundreds of thousands of pages. In fact, people who work in the system don't fully understand the entire system. It's so complex.
Yes. And I think there is going to be a slash and burn on that. By the way, an interesting point to be made, one of the other things that people have not been paying much attention to is that Trump is proposing a split in terms of how taxes are actually collected. And so, you've had the IRS, which is the
SARS in America.
Yeah, which is SARS in America, but it's basically it's been the Internal Revenue Services, and he's now creating an External Revenue Service.
Yes,
so effectively what he's doing is he's splitting all of the taxes from within the country from customs, excise, and tariffs, which he expects to be a significant chunk of the bottom line, which is very clever, because it's immediately able to show people exactly where money is coming from. Because if everything's run by the IRS, you just see an uptick in funds, but you don't know.
Well, and then, of course, you turn around and go, look, taxes are good, because how else are we going to fund everything, right?
Yes. Yeah.
But if you suddenly see that half of the money to fund your government comes from, China paying to import their cars, or whatever it ends up being, well, then great. Let's do more of that, right? So that's been his argument.
Yeah. So again, it's very clever, because it's very effectively putting a spotlight on the various sources where money is coming from, and I think there's going to be a major awakening in people's minds at that point, in terms of how best to take the country forward and make it prosperous, because ultimately that the money that you get in, it's a question of whether people outside the country are going to be paying for it, as in Mexico building the wall, or whether it's taking it from the individual taxpayers.
Yeah. Yeah. Talking about slash and burn, and we got onto the California fires.
Yeah, so we should get to the California fires, but we should also, just very briefly touch on Greenland.
Where do you want to go? Greenland first?
Yeah, I want to go Greenland.
It's a Trump
first.
issue.
Yeah, and it's a Trump issue. So what was interesting was, Trump said we want to acquire Greenland, and I think a lot of people at that point immediately said, Trump doesn't understand the Mercator projection on maps, because he looks at it and he thinks that Greenland and he thinks that Greenland is huge, whereas Greenland, just because it looks bigger than Africa. And I then did a bit of digging myself, and then posted a range of countries that are smaller than Greenland in terms of area.
Every single one in Europe, pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much every single one in Europe. But then going down to so it's Saudi Arabia, Egypt, going down, and it's significantly bigger than South Africa.
So it's massive.
In terms, it's absolutely massive, and more importantly, the population of Greenland is around about 56,000 people.
Right. So if you made it part of America as a territory,
yes,
and then you allowed Americans to move there because there was industry going on.
Yes.
Within a couple of generations, you would basically have an American state.
Exactly, yeah.
Essentially, because the 50,000 probably, assuming you had Americans go there and have families.
Yeah, and the fact is that the U.S. already has military bases out there. Now, but the other point that I need to make as well, which also ties in with, all of the stuff that Trump has been talking about in terms of making Canada a 51st. Yeah. So a lot of people have been laughing at this and saying that Trump has been taking the piss, but also take the view that his case very specifically is that, if you guys become the 51st state, then you don't have to worry about tariffs anymore. And, more to the point, the balance of trade is going to trip quite dramatically in your favor.
Yeah, I think it's an art of the deal thing. I don't think he wants a 51st state. I also think Canada would be very bad as a 51st state because they would be another Democrat state. So you'd then have to win or lose,
but
with a giant population.
But again, one of the points that I want to touch on as well is that if you take the view that overall temperatures are going to continue rising for the next period, and that's very clear from solar flare activity and that type of stuff that we are going to be going through a slightly warmer period. Not as warm as the planet has been in the past, but a slightly warmer period, which certainly means that the Arctic passageway is going to be a significant point of influence at a global level because as it is, the Chinese have a huge advantage in that they're able to move their stuff from China to Europe by ship through the Arctic Passage, essentially through Russian waters, very efficiently, rather than routing
going
it
all the way around.
Going all the way around the Indian Ocean and then up through the Suez Canal. Now they just hop over the top and come straight down, and it's very efficient. And right now, effectively, what that means is that route is the purview of the Russians and the Chinese.
Yeah.
And if the Americans want to be doing something similar in terms of stuff that gets moved from Japan, as an example, it becomes far more complicated.
Yeah, I think the 51st state with Canada stuff is about making them making an economic power sort of zone, so to speak. So, and in doing that, bringing them on board, and then exactly what you're talking about with regards to the Arctic, but also because you can see the three things he's focusing on, right? It's the Arctic, it's the Panama Canal, and it's the Suez Canal. Mm-hmm. So it's all the trade routes, essentially. The only thing he hasn't yet focused on is Cape Point. Maybe he feels he doesn't need to because going around Africa is quite long distance. In my opinion, that's a little bit short-sighted, but I understand he doesn't see any value coming from Africa regardless. So there's nothing coming directly from here, and he doesn't. If he can shore up Suez and Arctic and Panama, then he's got all of the major shipping routes done. And I think that is definitely a legacy play. I think he's definitely moving towards that in terms of that was the president, that was the guy that basically made America own global trade. And I actually think that some of his talk with Britain is going to come down to that because the Suez is a similar story to the Panama Canal.
Yes.
Built by the colonial power and then surrendered for pretty much nothing.
Yes.
For no frickin' reason. And you can argue about land all you like. At the end of the day, they could have kept that forever, and you can take it if you want. It's the same as what we saw in Hong Kong. I mean, Hong Kong should still not be part of China, but it is. Everyone's just ignored the fact that China completely violated an international agreement with Britain, and Britain has just let it go.
No. I have an entirely different take on Hong Kong, but we're not going to waste time on that right now.
We'll get into another time.
But essentially, Hong Kong was captured by the British as part of the Opium Wars, and there was a 99-year lease that was signed by Britain, which is very similar to the scenario that you have in terms of Guantanamo Bay, where there was a lease that was signed for Gitmo, which obviously has not expired yet. But
yes,
but that's another story. But but your point about the trade routes is absolutely spot on because essentially what he's doing two things: he's ensuring the free movement of goods around the world as efficiently as possible because he recognized that's an impediment to overall trade, and of course, overall trade is ultimately the key to global prosperity.
Yeah.
And if you're able to remove all of the chokeholds that currently exist, and Suez is a chokehold because the Egyptians are in a position to crank up prices just because they can, and ditto in the case of the Panama Canal. So I think that, again, is Trump going to be very forceful in terms of ensuring that the U.S. at least has strategic control of the Panama Canal? The answer to that is yes. And we've known from the case of Manuel Noriega that would the U.S. hesitate in terms of effecting a regime change there in order to achieve their viewpoint? Well, they wouldn't.
Yeah, not a chance.
So so we've got that out of the way. Let's swing back to the California wildfire.
So Greenland's going to become part of the States at some level.
Look, the interesting thing in terms of how that works, you've got 56,000 inhabitants. Can you buy out those 56,000 inhabitants? I think the answer to that is yes. Can you actually tell them, we're giving like, there's 56,000.
Everyone gets $1 million.
If everyone gets $10 million, it's still cheap at the price, right?
Yes, it is. But I don't think they'll have to buy out the inhabitants. I think they'll just have to buy out Norway. Denmark, sorry.
No, but remember...
Same, but different.
Yeah, but remember that that Greenland, even though it's administered by Denmark, it's... for all intents and purposes, it is its own. And
let's see where that comes down to when the rubber hits the road on that, whether that's true.
And more to the point, it's a net drain on the Denmark economy. In terms of money that gets spent.
Yeah, all right.
But going back to the California fires.
Yeah, California fires. What an absolute shit show. I mean, there's no other way to describe it.
So we need to backtrack through a bit of history around how this stuff.
Well, let's first say something very obvious. California is a place where wildfires happen. This would be true if there were humans or if there were no humans.
Correct. And
it is just a place that is very dry often. It goes through periods of precipitation and dryness, but it is an area where there is a lot of dryness. The particular vegetation that is there.
Well, it's like the Western Cape.
Yes.
It's exactly like the Western Cape. And if you're not actually managing the vegetation, which was done for the longest time in California through controlled burns.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Absolutely.
why were controlled burns stopped?
They're environmentally unfriendly, Kanthan.
Yes, they're environmentally unfriendly. So, and Mother Nature, actually doesn't give a shit about that.
Yes.
Mother Nature will go in and it's burn, baby, burn. And it's part of the natural cycle because to a large extent, that's how the soil replenishes itself.
That's right. Speak to any botanist and they'll tell you about plant growth post-fire. And that, in fact, some plants are reliant on those events occurring in certain parts of the world. Absolutely. And even to some extent, animal life is reliant on it because they're reliant on the plant biome.
Right. So that's the first thing that happened is that they eliminated the controlled burns, which meant that any fire that breaks out, there's no way of stopping it effectively because you have this entire fuel supply that has not been kept under control. Then the second problem is that they didn't have water to put out the fires. Why did they not have water to put out the fires?
Okay. So, all right. So they haven't been managing the brush properly. They haven't been managing the forest properly.
So that's the first problem.
Well, I think it's important to say, and this comes from Schellenberger, who was on Tucker's podcast recently, who said, this isn't a forest fire. This is a brush fire. This is, and that's why I've been to where this fire happened. It's a beautiful part of Los Angeles, my favorite part of Los Angeles. Actually, I love that city, and haven't been there since Gavin Newsom and the guy before him screwed it up completely. But it's really wonderful. You drive from Santa Monica Pier on what they call the Pacific Coast Highway, the PCH.
PCH, yeah.
And it's. It's not like a highway like we think of it. Yes, it's at points it's several lanes, but it's just this road that on the one side of it there's literally driveways similar to what you find in Cape Town, Bantry Bay, and that sort of area going up to Camps Bay there. And there's just these houses that are overlooking the Pacific Ocean, magnificent, beautiful on the one side that becomes Malibu. As you go down the Pacific Coast Highway on the right-hand side, you can veer off into the mountains, and there's this area called Topanga, which is also just, it's beautiful.
And this entire beautiful stretch features in so many movies.
Pretty much. If any time they've made a movie in LA and they've wanted to show the landscape, this is where they film. Yes. These are the areas, and then the Palisades is around sort of the other side, and it's just a really nice part of the world. And so, they've had this. They haven't had any management. And then in the main area that burnt, the main sort of residential area, which was the Palisades, they had a reservoir there, very, very large reservoir, which it looks like hasn't had any water in it since, at minimum, since February 2024. But it looks like longer than that at this point. It's coming out that it might be maybe years at this point.
And tell us the reason why it doesn't have water in it.
Okay, so there's the immediate reason, and then there's the general reason. So the immediate reason is because they said they were doing repairs, which they haven't been able to complete for a reservoir that they absolutely knew they needed. But the broader reason is something that Trump alluded to on the campaign trail, and people thought he was nuts. You can go find the clip. I actually reposted it at the time because it was Trump being very insightful. But essentially, what happens is there are a lot of mountains in California. And you can actually go skiing in California in the winter, and on amazing hiking trails and stuff during that time, during the summertime, because they've got this sort of mountain range and the parks there. And what happens is snow melts and comes from there and from some of the states up north down into California through the topography. And that's a lot of their water supply. But years ago, not even just recently, partly recently they've changed policy, but years ago they diverted, instead of damming any of this or keeping any of this, a lot of it was diverted and just allowed to flow into the Pacific. So there have been times of drought.
And why was it diverted?
Okay, so the most recent reason is because of a fish called the smelt.
Thank you. Let's talk about this fish.
It's a nothing fish. It's not a fish you can eat. It doesn't offer particular value. There's not. The other thing that bothers me about this is they claim that if they diverted water, that they would affect the smelt's habitat.
Correct.
Right? And then the smelt would not. They haven't said that it would die. They haven't said that it would go extinct. They just said that it probably wouldn't be as great in numbers. And therefore, California doesn't have enough water, and specifically Los Angeles doesn't have enough water to deal with fires.
Yes. Because of a fish that adds no value to the economy whatsoever,
yes,
that is not in any way endangered, nor is it likely to be endangered.
It doesn't seem to add value to the ecology either.
Yes.
That's the other big part.
Right.
It's fascinating. But this is then compounded.
But you see, John, this ties in with the larger problem, and remember that Musk has touched upon this as well, in terms of the requirement that you need to get tests done to ensure that seals are not going to have their...
A whale isn't murdered by a missile.
So a whale isn't murdered by a missile, or that seals are not going to have their ears damaged by sonic booms caused by rocket launchers. To the extent that, they actually need to take it.
Okay, so this is where I want to go with this. Yeah. Because, yes, the brush fire, the brush being cleared, proper forest management, controlled burns, fire lines, these types of things is part of the story here. And that does come down to mismanagement over decades, as well as the water issue. That's mismanagement over decades. But then you've also got just mismanagement now, like current mismanagement. So they know they're having it wasn't actually a particularly dry period. They had normal precipitation in that area, but they know that they've got all this dry brush in the area. They see that they predict, this is Weather Service and stuff, predicts very high winds, 100 mile per hour winds. And they know that if you combine a fire with the dry brush plus the winds, you have a very big problem. So at no point does the mayor of Los Angeles or the governor of California, Karen Bass and Gavin Newsom, and no one else either in any positions of power, do any of them go, look, we should probably be on alert. We don't have a fire at the moment, but if there were one, we'd need to react quite quickly because it could get very much out of control. And you need to understand that when you have a major burning fire and 100-mile-an-hour winds...
They're not clearing away the dried brush.
Sure, but even if they didn't do that and they said, look, we're going to have fire trucks ready, we're going to have the water tankers, the aerial water tankers, the helicopters, the DC-10s, etc., the Canadian, the Canada Air, the C,
just have the
whatever,
military on standby. Fill a bunch of Hercules C-130s with water and get them to drop the stuff over.
The point is they had nothing on standby. While the mayor was at the Ghana president's inauguration out of the country, the fire department is completely fragmented and also under basically control of a whole bunch of people who openly say that they got their positions because of DEI. To be fair, the fire chief has quite a record. A good record. Like, in other words, she's worked her way up. She has been a firewoman, and she's worked her way up in that position. But the thing she's obsessed with is the fact that she's a lesbian, and that she's introducing more diversity into the fire department. Out comes a clip from a year and a half ago where they were interviewing, a TV program was interviewing the head of diversity at the fire department, who turns around and goes, people want to see that their firefighter looks like them. Who the fuck wants to see that their firefighter looks like them? I couldn't care what my firefighter looks like as long as they can save me from a fire. The other thing she turns around and says is that, if your husband, based on the question of, can you carry a fully grown man out of a fire? Some women may not be able to do that, but if your husband's caught in a fire, he got himself into that position, is her response, which is completely inappropriate because it doesn't matter the position people got themselves into.
Well, this comes back to Pete Hegseth's fundamental position in his confirmation hearings. It's the question that you should always be asking is whether the person is able to do the job, and you don't reduce the standards just to allow more people to be able to do the job. And a fundamental thing from my perspective on the part of a fireman is that a fireman should be able to carry out a fully grown man.
Yeah, absolutely.
As a very simple entry point.
Metric.
Yes.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether that person is a man or a woman. If you happen to be a strong woman and you're able to, carry out a 200-pound man over your shoulder, then it's great. Hire the person by all means. But if you say, well, we're removing that from the job description, and it's not a question of whether the person is able to do this very basic thing of rescuing people from a fire, then you are going to end up with the disaster that we've had right now.
Yeah.
So the question of the fire chief saying, no, a person does not need to be able to rescue someone from a fire. And if they're in the fire, then it's their own fault to start off with. The other thing that was interesting about this is that lots of people called in private firefighting forces and said, hey, listen, here's my property, go and save it.
Well, it's interesting because of who did that. And
Yes.
the most high-profile case of that is a guy by the name of Rick Caruso.
Mm-hmm.
And Rick Caruso ran for the mayoral office against Karen Bass, who
Yes.
is currently the mayor. And so he is a billionaire property developer, and he owns a shopping center, essentially, in the Palisades.
Yes.
So he saw the fire coming because the fire, by the time it got to the Palisades, had been burning for more than a day.
Mm-hmm.
And he saw it coming, and he hired private water tankers and firefighters, and that is one of the only commercial structures left standing in the Palisades. Now, the irony, of course, of not voting for that guy to be your mayor, and then that same guy manages to actually save property and lives from fire, and the woman you voted for doesn't.
Yeah, but people are outraged that he saved his own property. They said,
that's typical jealousy.
How dare you pay someone to protect your own property?
Yeah. Well, that's the NHI debate, isn't it? Well, how dare you have private healthcare, Kanthan? If I can't have it, then you can't have it.
Yes.
If something bad has to happen to me, then something bad has to happen to you. It's communism. It's socialism, communism, whatever you want to do. It's the politics of envy.
What I've got to say is that everyone who actually was smart enough to actually bring in private firefighters to actually protect their properties. Good for you guys.
Absolutely. And South Africa's the same story. South Africa is absolutely the same story. I heard a story about a hospital apparently that caught fire towards the end of last year.
July 2021 riots, when these rampaging thugs were, moving like wildfire throughout KZN. And there was a guy who paid a private security firm 5 million rand up front. He said, here's 5 bars for you. I need you to guard my factory and make damn sure that no one gets in there.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah.
They moved in and they ensured that the place was actually protected.
And his factory was fine.
And his factory was safe. Yeah. Educated decision. If I lose this, I lose everything. Is it worth 5 bars for me to bring these guys out here? Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, interesting. Well, and as I say, this hospital apparently caught fire and they waited an hour for the fire department. I mean, in South Africa, private firefighters are now becoming a thing. There's several services, in fact, and I think that's the way it's going to have to go, unfortunately, because we're fortunate. The Americans, this is the one thing that's been brought up. They build houses out of wood. So, if you have a fire and the air is on fire, because that's what happens with these winds, is that stuff is burning and these embers, thousands of embers, get caught by the wind,
yes,
and get carried. So you have just these flames in the air being carried by the wind, and anything they land on that's flammable starts burning.
Yes.
So your house is made of wood.
But again,
up it goes.
So there's a couple of reasons for this. The reason why the Americans started building houses out of wood, if you go back to the 1950s, was that the bricklayers union had become very powerful. And so because of the fact that, building houses out of brick, which the Americans used to do up until that time, became just too expensive because, again, when you've got over-regulation and building codes, it means that you're not able to get in anyone other than certified bricklayers to come and actually lay bricks at your home. And so those building codes then, over that time, 60, 70 years now, have been written in such a way that if your house is not built out of wood, there are all sorts of hoops that you have to jump through. So, for example, you could, prefabricate homes out of concrete slabs and then, assemble them on site very efficiently, which gets done in other parts of the world. You can't do that in terms of the California building codes.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, look, I think that's true. And then also the other thing, most of America, it's not just California, though, wood was quite cheap as well. That's the other side of the coin. And they created a whole industry of building houses out of wood because their people, now all their tradesmen, know how to work in houses built out of wood. Some of the nice aspects to that, their houses are built out of wood and drywall and things like that. So they're nice aspects. You want to add a window, you need a saw and a window basically, and then you can have a window in this afternoon. It's not like our houses with bricks where there's proper construction that needs to take place. So there's pros and cons, but certainly the flammability.
The flammability is the biggest con, and it's and then that's the reason why you need to have smoke detectors in every single room wired into your alarm system, because otherwise the insurance companies are not going to cover the place, and it's an utter mess.
Yeah, and I mean this is so. And then there's the other side of this. Lots of people have lost their homes. A couple of dozen people have lost their lives.
But look at it on the bright side, John.
Yeah.
So suddenly all of this land has become available for low-cost housing.
Low-cost housing, or a rich benefactor who cares about the people. I'm thinking someone like BlackRock, for example, could come along and buy all the property for everyone's benefit, of course, for the greater good, Kanthan.
Yeah, because it's very clear that all of these properties, people can't go back there now because it's going to be too dangerous and they're not going to be able to rebuild. So let's just condemn the lot and then sell it off to someone who'll be kind enough to give them
a little bit for their property, for their land.
Like 10 cents on the dollar for their land. And let's take it from there.
We'll just take it from there. Well, it will be interesting to see. The other thing that I think will be interesting to see, which has been mentioned following this fire, is that obviously California is a liberal state, have been voting Democrat for basically 30 years now. You can, the one anomaly in there is Schwarzenegger, but he was a Hollywood type who got in as a Republican but did Democrat things. So, you know, and that's got a lot to do also with some policy shift that happened in the late 80s. But it will be interesting now to see, because there's a lot of talk. It's all anecdotal, but there's a lot of talk that all these people that have been involved in these fires have all kind of turned around and said, that's it, I'm done with the Democrats, or I'm voting Republican next time, or Trump was right, or, you know, these are kind of anecdotes that come out. And we'll have to see. We'll have to see with the next election if it lasts long enough. Equally, I've also seen people making excuses.
By the way, has California finished counting their votes yet? Because they were still counting those votes last time we looked.
Yeah, they did finally finish. Remember, they had to finish by January 6th. So they did eventually finish counting their votes. Yeah, just a very sad. It's a sad thing, because California is actually probably the nicest state in America for a lot of reasons. As I said, you know, it's very beautiful, and that's on the coast and the interior. It's quite sort of diverse in both geography, but also in weather. Although the weather is always pleasant within those bands, so if you want to find cold, you can.
It's basically like Cape Town.
It's even better than Cape Town, because it doesn't, you know, a place like San Diego, which you can compare to something like Cape Town, in terms of its vibe. It doesn't rain as much. You know, that horrible winter sort of that Cape Town tends to have, where all the Germans go back home. You know, that doesn't happen. So it is really, in many ways, a lovely place to live. It was always the sort of free living state, and through the sort of 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s kind of in America, it was, you know, where the surfers went, and, you know, it was just a really cool place where a lot of cool ideas came from. You know, a lot of innovation came out of that state, a lot of smart people, a lot of development.
Well, let's be very clear. No one's been able to replicate Silicon Valley around the world.
Yeah.
As much as they've tried to do so. Yeah. But they've just not been able to.
Yeah, and the rocket technology came from Caltech, a lot of it, you know, that we use today. So there's plenty of that stuff. A lot of that went into NASA. So... yeah, it's just kind of sad. It's kind of sad that that's kind of what happened to the state. There doesn't seem to be any direction or vision in that state. And they always fall back on this, we're the 5th largest economy by GDP in the world, or something like that, right? And it's like, cool, guys, that's not going to last forever, right? You just burnt down like 1/10 of your city and did nothing to stop it. That's not going to last forever. At some point, and we've seen this with Silicon Valley already, you know, Silicon Valley has started to flee. You know, cities like Austin in Texas have ballooned as a result of people leaving the tech industry in California and moving there. And yeah, it's going to be interesting to see what happens. A very interesting place. And look, maybe if this podcast's still going in like 2032, 36, maybe California votes red. Who knows?
I think it actually might end up coming sooner than that. Do you want to pull stuff back closer to home?
Yeah, well, let's since we've discussed Trump and a lot on America.
So one of the tie-ins I'd like to go to in terms of Trump is that I think that Trump is going to be completely hard-assed around.
Oh, he's going to be a dick
around South Africa's race policies.
Oh, you think race policies?
I think he's going to come after the race policies, and one of the reasons why I think he's going to come after the race policies is because Musk feels very strongly about those policies.
Does he?
Yes.
What makes you say that?
The fact that his mother speaks out on stuff that's going out here on a regular basis.
In Afrikaans, I might add.
In Afrikaans, absolutely. And, you know, so even though, you know...
I do want to say that's very good insight no one's giving you anywhere else. You're only getting that on this show.
Yeah.
So just carry on,
yeah,
please.
And understand that that May Musk, to a large extent, actually reflects what it's kind of like Medvedev says in Russia what Putin then says a year later. So it's a good bellwether in terms of what's actually going on.
So I think that's very interesting. I mean, I'm more typical. What you've just said, I'm very hopeful for, because I think those policies are all now 142 race laws that discriminate against people who are not black. And I mean, black African. So laws that will discriminate mostly against whites, but will also discriminate against colored people and will also discriminate against Indian people. 142 of them. So now I think equal or more laws, in fact more, if I'm not mistaken, than apartheid itself had. I will agree that they are relatively poorly enforced. So, but
with an efficient DA running the show, then they'll suddenly be enforced better.
But I would also argue that it's worse to strangle your private economy, the private sector. It's worse to strangle the private sector than to put out a whole bunch of benches in the parks that say no whites and no blacks. Okay, now apartheid did both, but I'm just pointing out that yes, we don't see like those types of obvious race-based things in everyday society, but the things that the ANC has done and is doing with now the help of the GNU, thank you the DA, thank you the Freedom Front Plus, thank you the Patriotic Alliance, all of you own this. The things that they are doing are as damaging, if not more damaging.
Well, yeah, I'll give you a very specific example. Like, take the case of Herman Mashaba, who built up a very successful business during the apartheid era, and props to the guy for doing it at the time, because it was, literally building a business from the ground up.
Yep.
Capitalism at its finest, identifying a niche in the market. Can you imagine at the time if the apartheid government comes along and says, you need to give 30% of your company to white people? Now, and that's the absurd scenario that we've got today, where instead of actually celebrating the fact that people are building businesses, you want them to be giving away pieces of their business to people who have not earned it at any level.
The thing that drives me the most nuts, I mean, you're right on all of that, but the thing that drives me the most nuts is what this all does to incentives. So I'm entrepreneurial. I've owned several businesses in the past. I've built businesses, and I can tell you that there are several businesses over the years and still today that I do not open, which would employ people and give people jobs, etc., and improve the economy, create growth. And I don't do that because I consider, okay, what are the hoops I'm going to have to jump into? Or if I am successful, how much of my business am I going to have to give away? Or how much am I going to have to lie and window dress and appoint a CEO who's the right color and then have a super CEO or a board chairman or something that does the things I want him to do, but look, the guy in front is the right guy type of thing, wasting money to do that, or getting tenders by doing certain things. Told by someone who works for a consulting firm recently that they send some people to consult on something with government. I'm not going to give any details because it might expose the identity, but the specific sector consulting firm asked to come and consult. Sent 2 white guys. They're the best guys they have, partners. Know their stuff, very experienced, very knowledgeable. Government gave them a call back and said, guys, thanks for sending your folks to the meeting, but why did you send us 2 white guys? They said, well, those are the best guys we have. They said, you won't be getting our business if you keep sending us white guys. And it's just like, so I look at, I worry about not only the crushing effect it has on current business, but the crushing effect it has on incentives. People don't want to start businesses. People don't want to get into the economy because they look at it and they go, this is too much hard work, and it's too difficult to overcome all these hoops. At the end, then, to have to be told, listen, you're the wrong color to own the majority of this business. And so they just go, I'd rather not. Rather not.
Yeah. So if you take the view that you have the incoming Trump administration, which is fervently committed to the idea of a meritocracy, And are they likely to be supportive of any place that is pushing anything other than a merit-based system? I think the answer to that is no. And, to what extent that then plays itself out in a variety of stuff. Remember that we're hosting the G20 in 2025. South Africa is hosting the G20, which means
Donald Trump will be here.
Donald Trump will be here. And that's going to be fascinating in terms of the conversations that play out at the time. Because if Trump is here, rest assured Musk is going to be here with him. Pretty much most of his top team are going to be around. And they're going to be meeting with people across the board because that's pretty much what they do. And they're going to be asking tough questions. And is that going to affect their policy stance in terms of South Africa to the extent that it starts putting pressure on the DA-ANC coalition? Yes, I think it will.
Yeah, fascinating, and I hope that's true. I think on a more conventional level, AGOA's in trouble. I think we've angered the Americans.
AGOA's overrated, and I've done the numbers on AGOA.
Agreed.
We can afford to lose AGOA tomorrow, and it'll be a blip.
Economically, you're right.
Yeah.
I think psychologically you may be underestimating things a little bit.
Yeah, but
I don't want the rand to go to 21 from 18 or 19 just because a whole bunch of investors are idiots. They're not as smart as you.
So remember, the rand will go from 18 to 20 if Trump decides it. Because the fact of the matter is that the reason why we've had this turnaround is because of sentiment on the part of the U.S. And it's like the U.S. effectively has the ability to decide, because of the fact that they print the reserve currency.
Yeah, they're the hegemon.
Yeah. So I'm not stressed about AGOA at all. But what I am concerned about is if Ramaphosa and the DA want to be playing with the U.S. and remember, our choices are going to be that right now the country is divided into the GNU, and we've got MK on the other hand. And those are effectively the two forces that we have, because the EFF is now effectively written out of the picture. They're done and dusted. MK has not been allowed to get even a toehold into the governing structure of the country so far. It's very clear that the DA and the ANC between them have to do their damnedest to ensure that MK is not able to get a foothold in. And, clearly what's happening in KZN is going to be crucial to that, because we've got municipal elections coming up in 2026. Mm-hmm. And if MK is actually able to get any foothold on any municipality at any level, that's going to be the thin edge of the wedge in terms of the DA and the ANC then needing to try and come up with a new narrative that's going to then carry them forward to the following national elections. So between now and then, the best thing that the DA and the ANC can hope for is to have economic growth at some level. But we also know that it's those race-based policies that are stopping economic growth.
And you just passed Bella, and you are threatening NHR. It's passed, and you're threatening to bring it in.
Exactly.
None of these things are going to cause, in fact, they're going to cause degrowth.
Yes.
I think those are interesting. The reason I brought up AGOA is I think that's just an easy thing for them to expunge. Okay, and I think it's more important why they would expunge it. I don't really care about AGOA. I agree. The media is hysterical on it. It's not that big a deal. I think we would recover. We might actually do better in the long term on our agricultural side as a result of not being part of AGOA. But my thing is that I think. I hear the race-based policies. I hope that is a focus of the administration, and that is a push of how things are negotiated. But I think we've already pissed this incoming administration off with everything we've done with regards to Israel and Iran and Qatar and all of that stuff, and the RCJ, etc. We've made it clear that we're an ally of Iran. a very, very close ally of Iran. And we're going to have to either...
Although, in fairness, Pando is no longer there. So
Yes.
yeah.
No, she isn't. But the people that are there are kind of saying similar things. They agreed, not as forcefully and not as irresponsibly. But we've sent a guy who is irresponsible and is virulent on this particular topic as our ambassador to the US. You know, and so and who's completely partisan based on his and it becomes you know, not everyone's like this, but in his case, it's coming straight because he's a Muslim. So I think that was the wrong action to take. We should have taken a softer action. You know, you see someone like Trump coming in, and it's very obvious that if you just kind of butter him up the right way, give him a little bit of what he wants, and send the right person who talks the right way, and who acquiesces a little bit. You don't have to surrender much. We could.
Well, you don't have to surrender anything because you know he's interested in making the best possible deal that he can.
Yes, yeah, but I just think we've played the wrong hand. It's just even if you're the ANC and you're trying to be smart for yourselves, it's the wrong hand for them to play. Don't send someone conflictual on a pet topic of his. Send someone who has no relation to that pet topic.
And of course, the fascinating thing is that if South Africa just simply used India as a role model, you know, because India plays that game very well.
Brilliantly.
Yeah.
Brilliantly. I mean, you know, and Modi's particularly smart in this because he kind of, he knows how to kind of genuflect to Trump in a way that doesn't put India down, but it raises Trump up.
Yes.
And so Trump loves India and he loves Modi. And he's done basically nothing.
In fact, I understand that his first official visit outside the country is going to be to India.
But smart, as we've discussed repeatedly. You know, India is the next powerhouse. And
more importantly, if Trump's focus is going to be China, propping up India then becomes a crucial part.
Absolutely. Yeah. You want India to slowly be de-escalated, and India to be propped up because India is on your side of the fence more than they are not.
Yes.
So you know, and
more importantly, India's got exactly the same feelings in terms of Israel as the US does because they've been very strong allies for the longest time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's also true, and the other thing on India again is that they are a growing population, whereas China is a shrinking population. You know, in terms of this population growth issue, which I actually think, you know, Musk goes on about this, but is a big problem. You know, South Korea may not exist.
We've spoken about that. You know, all the North has to do is to just sit and wait because, you know, the North does have a positive TFR. So, you know, they just have to sit and wait and then just walk across the border and claim it.
Yeah. And in some respects, Africa's in a similar position with regards to Europe, because Europe is going to expire itself, and then it'll just be empty cities waiting to be populated with you know, a continent that at some point will reach its growth potential. Obviously, we're not anywhere close to that. Might not happen in our lifetimes. But at some point, 1.5 billion people are going to come into and I was saying this to someone the other day. I was saying, you know, the manufacturers in everywhere else in the world, the Americans, the Chinese, the Brits, the Europeans, etc. At some point, they're going to get tired of selling one new washing machine to every family every 6 years. You know, they're going to say, well, there's no washing machines in Africa on average. We would like to sell 1 billion washing machines in the next 10 years, and everything else that gets sold, right? And so at some point, Africa is going to become a focus because there is so much consumerism to be taken advantage of. There's so much capital growth to happen here to bring Africa into the 21st century. And most first world countries are already there. Everyone's got all their appliances. They've got their TVs. They've got their cars. They've got their houses. Africa doesn't. So the potential is there. I agree. You know, they said to me, "Oh, but the political situation and the will and the culture and whatever."
The biggest
and
issue
I said,
that
you know
we've got,
what?
it's not political, it's logistical.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I said capital will override every single one of those challenges. Ultimately, again, it might not be in our lifetime. So I'm not telling you, you know, go buy a whole bunch of land in Mogadishu because, you know, that's going to be really valuable stuff in some points of view. It may, you know, you may get it lucky in 30 years, but it may take 300. But it's going to happen at some point. You got to see that as being evidentiary. What else? Anything else?
No, I think, you know, the interesting thing about Bella is that, I've seen people complaining about a very pissed off mother whose child has now been sent to an Afrikaans medium school, and her child doesn't speak Afrikaans.
It's not so fun when the rubber hits the road.
And has been placed in that school by
the government.
By the government. You know, so that's one example. The other thing that's pissed off a lot of people is that undocumented illegals will now be admitted to school simply because of the fact that you don't need ID to get into schools.
Amazing. Just amazing.
Yeah.
Well, good. On the Bella, quickly.
Yes.
I felt the focus was wrong. I understand why Afrikaners were focusing on it as a language issue. But the problems with Bella are not just language.
No. The problem.
In fact, you could argue, I get for them it's the major issue, but you could argue that that's the minor issue of Bella. Okay? The minor issue, the major issue is not actually language. The major issue is what Bella does to the schooling system and how it does things like you've just described, where it takes kids and puts them in inappropriate places, or where it allows illegal immigrants to have access to our schooling system, which it will then be overrun, as our healthcare system has to a large extent been. And then there's the governance issue, which is actually the long-term problem, because government has tried to centralize, through Bella, has tried to centralize governance of schools. And of course, we know centralized governance never works. So that's really what's going to bring, well, you get equality. You'll get equality, which means all schools will be as bad as the worst possible school in the country.
Yes.
Eventually. So if you went to a Model C, and that was a public school, but a decent school, well looked after, well run, eventually those schools will look exactly like a township school that performs poorly, and every township school will look like every Model C, and then everybody will be happy because everybody will be equal, and that's what we always want. That's what the United Nations tells us we need, an equal world. Kanthan?
Homeschooling for the win, John. Homeschooling for the win.
So, interesting study that just came out. 2 weeks, I think it was, of AI instruction at home versus 6 months of schooling. AI for 2 weeks beats
John,
6
I
months.
said this like 3 months ago.
You
You
did.
pissed all over me.
I argued with you, but I still
You pissed all over it.
I still will argue with you because it's a study, so it may not be real world applicable, and we'll still see how that plays out. Lots of hurdles to get over in education before we get anywhere globally, because we have teachers unions and teachers think they're more important than students. But yes, that will be an interesting fork in the road. So let's see. But you know, you like being prescient. You've been writing your little blog for many years, and lots of things you've said there have come out to be truthful.
I don't believe that Netanyahu will survive
this.
Yes, because I think that there are a number of knives out for him internally, and this is going to be an opportunity. But I also believe that with Trump, Israel will end up being stronger as a result. And well, again, fingers crossed around this.
Yeah, let's see. Look, Netanyahu's had a good run. If he's out, he's out. I'm kind of ambivalent on him.
And there are a lot of people who want to see him finally go to trial, because remember, he's been putting it off with. Yeah,
I'm not a big fan of that. I have to be honest. I think
I'm not a fan
I think
of
it's
it.
I think it's unfortunate that if politicians get high enough, you don't tend to prosecute them, and they kind of get away with things. But I genuinely and generally don't like the prosecution of political actors.
It's
I
lawfare.
think, I think you should just leave them alone. Especially, a prime minister who then gets voted out and goes, "Listen, I'm out. I'm leaving. I'm retiring. I'm done. I'm going to go give some talks at universities and just let them do whatever they want to do." Like it really is unhealthy to start going after and trying to put those guys in prison.
I agree completely.
All right. Good. Well, that's a nice long podcast. Sorry for the break in transmission, folks, but we also take time off, as does the studio we record in. I must apologize for some technical difficulties today. If you have been watching on YouTube, Kanthan's camera seems to blink intermittently, and we've tried to fix the cabling. We fixed it, we thought, before the podcast started, but once we were into it...
And I thought it was my magnetic personality.
It could be. It's just all that interference. So apologies if it was really bugging you. Please just listen to the podcasts via audio only. Video wasn't great this time. We'll try to get it fixed next time. As always...
I'm pretty sure that people don't want to look at us most of the time. They just want to hear us.
Yeah, I would assume so. But some people watch this for inexplicable reasons. Thank you, as always, for listening or watching, and we will catch you next time. Cheers.